Touch Me Daddy. Written by K. Ashley. Chapter 1. Derek's Point of View. It was stressful managing my own business, especially because it dealt with cybersecurity. In addition to managing the typical challenges and difficulties of running a billion-dollar business, I was also continuously alert, waiting for the next cyber assault. I was so exhausted by the time I came home at night that I couldn't even imagine interacting with anyone else. That is why I chose the Avalon as my residence. It was opulent, provided everything I knew I required, including maid service and valet parking, and the ambience was typically quiet and tranquil. Not to mention that Spencer Maxwell, my best buddy, lived just a few floors up. In essence, I was stress-free and living the high life when I left the office. I inhaled deeply before diving beneath the water and quickly across the pool, my favorite facility in the entire building. It is located on the 51st floor. As long as I could remember, I had been a swimmer. As a result of my high school swimming success, I transferred to Princeton to join their squad. I used to come down and practice whenever I hired out the pool for myself, acting as though I was in a collegiate race and pushing myself to get the greatest time. It kept me cognitively alert, in shape, and in tune with everything around me. I noticed a person enter the pool area as I got to the edge and lifted my head out of the water. I could see her magnificent physique through the water flowing over my goggles, and her long, seductive legs. Skye, Spencer's daughter, who had recently returned from college, caught my attention as I slipped them off and shook the water out of my hair. Even though I had rented the pool for a few hours, I didn't mind at all having her there, especially since she was wearing a little bikini. She grinned and replied, "Hey, would it be okay if I came in for a dip?" "Not at all," I said as I combed my hair back. She descended into the inviting water. "This feels so good." "Yes," I replied. "Are you relieved to have returned from college?" She sighed and rubbed her fingers down the pool's glass edge as she answered, "Yeah, I miss having fewer obligations, but I suppose it had to happen sometime." I chuckled. "Explain it to me. I would do anything to go back to Princeton." She continued, glancing at me and biting her bottom lip. "That's right, you're a boy from Princeton. I absolutely overlooked that." I jokingly said, "I don't think we should be in the same pool together. Yale student, Princeton student. Things will inevitably become intriguing." "You would simply swim away from me," she added. "I saw their moves. I'd be lucky to complete a lap in this place." I replied, "Nah," tracing my gaze down her slender figure. "You are in excellent form. It just requires technique. I could show you that." "Yeah?" "Sure, anytime." I swam backward in response. I was aware that it was probably inappropriate to flirt with this girl, but I found myself drawn to her ever since she moved in with her father at the Avalon after returning from school. She had the perfect amount of curves, bouncy blonde hair, and ice blue eyes that, when she looked at me, penetrated my soul. It didn't help that this kid had a pure heart below her sarcastic, self-assured exterior. Although she was kind, she also had good judgment and understood how to go about achieving her goals. She was really tempting due to her assertive personality and stunning body. I swam over to the pool's edge. She dove below the surface before rising again. Water poured down her plump, bouncy breasts and across her entire body. Her suit top was made up of two really tiny pieces of cloth that were held together by threads. As I turned to gaze at her, she opened her eyes and grinned. She was the daughter of my closest friend, therefore she should be off limits, I kept telling myself, but I couldn't help myself. She crossed the pool and came to a stop in front of me. Then she reached out and ran her hands over my muscles. "How much swimming did you do to achieve these?" I said, gazing intently into her eyes, among other things. What other things are they? Oh, just the regular daily stuff, I said. With a sly grin on her face, she glanced over my chest. My swim trunks soon began to feel constricting as I felt chills go down my spine. It was quite difficult for me to maintain my composure as I desperately wanted to fuck this girl and wanted to grab her by the little bikini bottoms. I was aware that it was wrong, but with each step I took, my willpower weakened. The water lapped about us as we stood there so near to one another that we almost touched. She gave me a sly look as she ran her hands through her soaking hair and raised her hands. I took a long, steadying breath to prevent myself from bending forward and taking a nipple into my mouth as her tits jiggled in front of my face. I exhaled deeply as I said, "Skye, I've noticed a flirtatious attitude coming from you lately, something that wasn't there before." She walked to my side, grinning and giggling to herself as she stared down at the water's surface. She reached out and ran her finger down my arm as she turned her head to look at me. She bit her lip and leaned in close to my ear, which I could see out of the corner of my eye. She said, "It's because I want you." My chest felt electric shocks rush through it. Any little control I had suddenly vanished into thin air as I turned my head toward her and gazed at her. I instantly turned, putting one arm around her waist and the other over her face. I leaned in and tilted her head while giving her a passionate kiss. I tasted her by sliding my tongue directly into her mouth and swirling it around. My hand moved deeper beneath the water and cupped her ass cheek as she groaned quietly. She dropped her hands underwater while holding the waistband of my swim trunks as her muscles slowly loosened. The tip of my cock, which was now rubbing against my suit, was lightly touched by her fingers as they descended further. I wanted to feel her entire hand encircling my shaft, so I moaned into her neck. I drew her near me and kissed her on her mouth, neck, and breasts. As my fingertips skimmed across her delicate, supple skin, she reclined her head and closed her eyes. Her top was showing her rock-solid nipples. I moved the fabric out of the way, knelt down and popped one nipple inside my mouth. When I flicked my tongue around her tit, the flavor of her skin sparked intense excitement in my cock.
She leaned back and began groaning as her hands clung to the top of my trunks.
With my other hand, I lifted her other breast and started stroking it. She then put her hand inside my trunks, grabbing hold of my cock, and started to gently rub it. I bit down firmly and raked my tongue across her flesh as I snarled. She started yanking at my trunk's tie right away, frantically trying to free my cock out of its confinement. My hand remained touching her breasts as I thrust my hips forward. She slid down my trunks to my legs while the water swirled around us. She grabbed my throbbing cock as she looked at me, and I groaned loudly. She was so fucking sexy, and I knew this was wrong, but I don't give a damn. Chapter 2. Skye's point of view. "Fuck me," I said in a command, without caring whether this man was my father's best friend or twice my age. The water glistened on his taut, strong chest, and his hazel eyes darkened. He took a step closer, stroking his cock while watching me rub my pussy. I was nervous, but I couldn't show him for even a second. As he come up to me, I watched him kneel on a lower step and grip my thighs. He yanked me away from the step and closer to his body. His assertiveness thrilled me, and I wrapped my legs around his waist. He slipped his hand forward and rubbed through my wetness, circling up to my clit and pressing hard against it. I moaned loudly, throwing my head back as he pushed his other fingers inside me and fucked me with it on the edge of the pool. He felt so good, and I couldn't wait to feel more. I could feel the heat of my climax building in my gut with each stroke. Just watching him pump his cock up and down while playing with my folds was enough to make me come. He worked his fingers quickly and purposefully, knowing he'd make me come before he touched me with his cock. I reached back and grabbed the pool's edge, letting the warm water splash up over my bouncing tits. As my cries became louder and wilder, he licked his lips and smirked. "Come on," he encouraged me. "That's right, baby, come for me." The fire within me surged, sending pulsating waves of pleasure throughout my whole body, like if his words alone were direct connections to my climax. I shouted and arched my back, feeling his fingers slide out of my grasp. He slid forward, my body convulsing, and put the head of his cock within me, catching the juices that were flowing. He was so huge, and he filled me up instantaneously, every ridge and wrinkle of his shaft taking over. I took a deep breath as I transitioned from the joy of an orgasm to the pleasure of his cock. As I stretched up and stroked my fingertips over his muscular abs, the water splashed between us. My lips hung wide, and ecstasy screams coming out from my throat, following the rhythm of his hips. I could hear our flesh slamming against each other and water spraying up around us. I saw his eyes as I raised mine, as our bodies collided against one another, our eyes locked. He penetrated me and grabbed my thighs while leaning forward and rolling his hips. His fingers sank into my flesh, and the simultaneous pleasure and pain put me into an ecstatic trance. Another orgasm was just on the verge of happening, but this time I was trying to restrain myself. I was enjoying how his cock moved in and out of me, making me go totally crazy. Derek had his eyes closed, his head swiveled back and forth, and he let out a loud moan. I was aware that we were not far apart. As the heat overwhelmed me, I reached down and started to stroke my clit, groaning increasingly loudly. My breathing grew labored, my body stiffened, and I teetered on the brink of spilling over, coming hard and long. My body writhed around Derek as my pussy tightened around his cock and he quickened his speed. He stared down at me as my muscles started to relax, pulled out his dick, and stroked it vigorously. His hot sperm began to spew out in streams across my tits as I leaned forward, thrusting out my chest and biting my lip. When all of the bliss waves had been released, he murmured softly while continuing to move his fingers up and down the shaft of his quivering body. I turned to walk over to the pool showers, turned them on, and washed the last of his passion off my body while grinning and biting my bottom lip. I turned around to look back at him as he plunged into the water to get his shorts. He put them on and left, a look of fatigue and contentment on his face. After finishing my shower, I snatched a towel to cover my body. I approached him and sat down next to him, feeling the remorse that he evidently was also experiencing. He had just fucked his best friend's daughter and was conscious of the fact that my father would have his head if he found out. I moved closer and gave him a kiss on his cheek. I said, "Don't worry, we'll keep it a secret." Quickly turning his head to gaze at me, he seemed astonished that I had sensed his emotions. He grinned and shook his head before luring me in with his lips. I took a deep breath and then let go of his lower lip. I got to my feet, put down my towel, and changed back into my bathing suit. I couldn't just stroll inside the flat, now that I shared it with my father. Really, I didn't want him to ask me any questions. I cast a quick peek across to Derek's keys on the table and noticed his phone. I approached, grabbed it, and entered my phone number into the contacts. Even as a young child, I had a hidden crush on Derek, so this wasn't the only time I wanted to fuck him. Despite the fact that I had dated other guys, I knew that Derek could give me pleasure that I couldn't even fathom because he was older. I approached him and stood back as I saw him touch his beard-covered face. Even when he was overcome with guilt about having slept with his best friend's daughter, he was still incredibly seductive. I gave him a shoulder tap and gave him the phone. "Here," I said. "I entered my phone number in case you wanted to meet up again." He carefully grabbed his phone from me and watched as I turned and strolled out of the pool area. As I strolled around the corner to the elevator, I kept my calm. As soon as I got inside and the doors were locked, I leaned back against the wall and took a long breath. I couldn't believe it had finally happened after all this time. Derek Riggs had slept with me. For a long time, I had fantasized how it would be. With his wisdom and expertise, I knew he'd blow my mind, and he did. It was extremely fantastic how his body slid against mine and how he took control of me. I was used to being the one who needed to take the initiative in order to achieve what I wanted, and the men I had slept with in the past had been about my age or a bit younger. I attempted it with Derek, but he immediately squashed it, pushing me to the exact position he desired. In order to put the initiative back in his hands and help him overcome his absurd guilt over being best friends with my father, I had given him my phone number. The one thing I did desire, though, was to have another sexual encounter with him. He had best not take too long, or he'd discover me asking for those swimming lessons as soon as possible. In any case, I had asserted my sexuality on my own and had been brave and open about it, and it felt great. Now that I was back under his roof, my father watched over me constantly, making it challenging for me to be independent and follow my desires. On the other hand, I didn't want anyone to be injured as a result of the situation, but I didn't see how that could be done unless we kept it a secret. Derek would want me to be completely silent as much as possible since discretion was crucial in this situation. The last thing either of us wanted was for my father to discover that we had been deceiving him and hooking up on the side. I exited the elevator and made my way to the door before softly turning the key and entering. My father was reading the New York Times in his usual recliner as I passed by the living room. I made an effort to pass silently, but he was quick. "Skye," he muttered, peering through his spectacles. "How did your swim go?" "Good," I answered after taking a long breath. "Did you happen to see Derek down there?" he inquired, his face expressionless. "I'm quite sure he had planned on swimming this afternoon as well." Yes," I responded, attempting to appear unconcerned. "I noticed him. He said, 'Hello, I'm going to take a shower.'" My father nodded, and I began walking toward my room, taking a long breath and rolling my eyes. As twisted up as that seemed, the pleasure of keeping secrets like this, doing something I knew I shouldn't be doing, was sort of exciting. Derek Riggs, aside from my father, was one of the most accomplished and influential men I knew, and I knew I'd be seeing a lot more of him. Chapter 3. Derek. While fixing my hair in front of the mirror, I pondered my time spent in the pool with Skye. I had accepted it with open arms even though it had not been at all what I had anticipated from my Saturday afternoon swim. Her firm contours, flawlessly bouncing tits, and the wicked way her mouth had curled up as she slid her hands down my body made her body look absolutely flawless. I felt so terrible about everything, but I also couldn't deny my attraction to Skye. She was like fire, and I was pulled to her like a moth. Having a taste of her magnificent physique did not lessen my desire for her. On the contrary, it simply fueled my need. Usually, after having sex with a lady, my desire and lust would also vanish. However, it seemed that our meeting in the infinity pool had just made things worse. I shook my head and started tidying up the flat while picking up my toothbrush to brush my teeth. Daily housekeeping was provided, but I always felt awful for making too much of a mess. When I was finished, I gathered my keys and planned to head someplace for a Sunday lunch. I was not a very good chef, and I had been ravenous ever since I had returned from my swim the previous evening. The steamy, sensual sex in the water made me hungry. It just so happened that Skye was scheduled to work at the cafe, where she was earning extra money while she contemplated her future plans. Getting a hot cup of coffee from a hot as hell barista wouldn't hurt. I made nice talk with a couple elderly women who joined me from the 31st level as I descended the elevator. I stepped to the side and let them leave first as the doors opened, fixing my shirt and anticipating seeing Skye. I exited the elevator and crossed the lobby, looking around the cafe for any signs of her. She didn't notice that I was observing her since she was assisting a client. As I reached back to take out my money, I froze and turned to face the door. While giving one of the bellboys his golf clubs, Spencer stood in the lobby and waved at me. I groaned and cast a backward glance at Skye before turning to head towards Spencer. The last person I wanted to meet at that moment was him, yet it appeared I had little option. Despite the fact that he was smiling and nodding, which let me know that he didn't know anything, my pulse was racing. I extended my hand to shake his. "Derek," he said joyfully, "just the man I was looking for." "Really? What's going on?" "Of course for golf," he said, grinning. "I was just on my way to the club just outside the city to play a round or two because it's a beautiful day outside. Are you game for it?" "Golfing? Oh, I have no idea. To be completely honest today, I plan do nothing." "Sunday fatigue? What? Did your hot date last night leave you exhausted?" I smiled and replied, "Something like that." When do we get to go out on the course together? Get your clubs now. It'll be fun," he smiled. "The club is celebrating Whiskey Sunday as well." "Are you certain that you'll even make it to the course?" "I'll keep my word this time," he added, grinning. I acknowledged there was no getting out of it and said, "All right, just let me put on a collared shirt." He slung his arm around my shoulders and murmured, "No need. I've got a few more in the car." I grinned and followed him to the doors, pausing to look back at Skye and the cafe as we went. Before turning and returning to her job, she grinned as she raised her head to look at me. My chest electrified, but it was swiftly subdued by her father stepping next to me. I hadn't planned on doing this today, but we got in the vehicle and drove to the course. "So, how's business doing?" he asked, reclining back in the car. "Good," I said. "With everything going on in our nation, things are certainly busy and on the increase after the David incident." "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "I saw him at a bar the other night, but he steered clear of me." "What exactly happened between the two of you?" I said. "He was a lazy son of a bitch. I swear, once we partnered up early, he was out to destroy us. He never worked, spent all of his time on vacations that he invoiced the business, and whined about crap when he didn't want to put the effort into it. Everything became too much, so I put my foot down when he began acting inappropriately behind my back. We unanimously decided to fire him when I discreetly called a meeting of the board. He still has some stock in the business, but not enough to have a say." "That's a shame," Spencer said in response. I chuckled. "What? You've despised that person from the start." He admitted that he was a bit of a dunderhead, but he still had to have had an impact on business. "Just a bit," I said. "We were able to manage the media attention and keep the story out of the newspapers." He was required to sign a non-disclosure and non-compete provision as part of our severance settlement. As we entered the winding road leading to the country club, Spencer commented, "Smart." He was staring out the window. The staff met us at the entrance as we exited and helped us carry our clubs to a cart that was waiting in front of the building. After signing in at the desk, we departed and made the decision to stop at the service cart for a whiskey on the way.
Spencer went first as I put on my golf glove and grabbed the club shaft when we arrived at the first tee. Spencer positioned himself in front of the ball in preparation for his first shot. Do you remember seeing Skye in the cafe? He backed up and hit the ball, which pulled to the right and landed just barely in the rough. As soon as we saw the ball fall, I said, "Yeah, what's it like for her to work there?" He laughed as he knelt down and retrieved his tee off the floor, adding, "She hates it. She must learn to take responsibility though. She's now a little lost, unsure of what she wants to accomplish with her life. Finding the next person to date is one of her major issues. But I'm not letting her date anyone until she obtains a job. She must organize her life without any distractions." It seems like a lot to ask, doesn't it? She can't help but fall in love, and that could make her run the other way, after all. "What are you? A dad now?" he questioned. I said, chuckling, "No, I'm just a person who was raised in a really strict family. I always did the exact opposite of what my parents wanted me to do." "She's no longer a child," Spencer said. "The stakes have increased. She already know that if she crosses the line and I see her talking to anyone, I'm going to cut her off immediately. She must learn to put in the effort if she wants to play. But I don't truly believe that will happen. She has a history of being fairly accountable. She seems to be going through a phase, in my opinion." Shaking my head, I swung my club and sent the ball sailing down the fairway. I saw it take a tiny turn before landing perfectly in the middle for a shot to the green. With a head shake, Spencer chuckled. "Leave it to you to stay off the course for so long and come in like a pro," he chuckled. We moved over to our balls when I shrugged my shoulders and climbed back to the cart. When Spencer expressed his sentiments towards Skye, I was at a loss for words. I thought it was a little theatrical, making her feel like she had to stay out of the dating scene or risk being cut off. On the other hand, I truly didn't know where to say anything. Ultimately, he was her father. I also understood that my thoughts about it were influenced in part by my plans to see her more often. Much more than that. Chapter 4. Skye. Working at the coffee shop on these early Monday mornings was a pain in the butt. Even though I had early courses in college, all I had to do was sit there and pay attention. This was a whole other game. I was stocking beverages, hauling buckets of ice, and getting ready for the early rush. At least I wasn't forced to do it by myself. Mandy and I were working together this morning. Despite the fact that we were very much polar opposites, Mandy had been my best friend for years. Mandy was reserved, introverted, and hardly ever did anything that would draw attention to herself. She would listen to my stories over and again while rolling her eyes at the reasons I did things the way I did. She was still fantastic at delivering solid, no-nonsense guidance while frantically attempting to control me. She had decided to go graduate school, so my father assisted in helping her secure employment at the cafe to help cover her tuition. Naturally, when my dad learned that she was enrolling in graduate school, a whole new bag of worms had been opened, and I had to put up with over 2 months of his guilt-tripping until he eventually gave up and turned his attention elsewhere. Mandy and I had come to work together in the meantime, and I was happy to have a friend alongside me. I turned back and placed the tray of muffins on the counter before opening the display case and placing each one at a time. Regarding its pastries, the facility maintained rigorous regulations. The stripes on the muffin wrappers needed to line up, and everything else needed to be arranged precisely with no crumbs. Although it was tedious, I wasn't too bothered by it. It provided me with work to accomplish. Mandy stated as she started a pot of coffee, "I still don't understand why you work here. Instead of making pennies to sort muffins, you could purchase like 50 of these cafes." I smiled and replied, "I like it, making me feel more like a real person as opposed to the little privileged kid who depends on her father. Also, he stays off my back when I work every day at a real job. He occasionally speaks to me as if I were 15, I swear." She chuckled. "Skye, I'm sorry to be the one to break the terrible news to you, but this is your first job and you are 21 years old." "So," I retorted sharply, "I attended college to acquire skills and to find employment, but I never imagined I would end up working in a coffee shop." "Well, if you could make up your mind about what you want to do, you could get out of this place, she said, poking me in the side. You have an Ivy League education. You can use it anywhere. Just decide what pumps you up, what makes you want to go out and get a job, and I don't mean for more shopping money. I will, I said, smiling. Right now, just like being part of society. As I placed the last muffin on the rack, my thoughts began to wander back to Derek. Mandy was going to berate me for making such a careless choice, so as much as I wanted to tell her what had occurred, I also knew that she would. She was still my best friend, so I had to let someone know. I thought I was going to blow up. I was thinking a lot at the time about my future, my father, and Derek right now. I definitely didn't want to keep that experience to myself because it had been the greatest sex I'd ever had with anyone. Actually, what I needed was advice, someone to give me the truth as they saw it. Mandy was that person. I knew it. In all the years we had known one another, she had never lied to me. I contemplated whether or not to bring it up. I made a valiant effort to keep myself occupied while getting ready for the cafe to open, but it was practically impossible. All I could think about was having the wildest, most gratifying sex I'd ever had on Saturday night. I felt heated and agitated just thinking about it. Then, on Sunday, I had felt lightning tingle through my chest as I had looked across the room and caught eyes with Derek. It had been challenging, but I had forced it down since I wanted to concentrate on my work. As I poured a customer's coffee, he had been so seductive as he crossed the lobby, his hair flawless, his smile kind, and his eyes fixed on me.
The only thing that had cleared the ideas from my mind was watching him leave with my father, which served as a reminder of the need for caution on my part. No matter what, my father was never able to learn.
By the sink in the rear, I had the dishes stacked while I thought about what to do next. I finally had to let this out. I was about to lose my mind from it. Even if Mandy mocked me for it, I had to tell her. I went back to the front and took a seat next to her. I placed the tray down and turned to face her, saying, I have to tell you something. What? She showed some interest. I looked around and said in a low voice, something happened last night at the pool. Derek was there when I went there to swim. We chatted, flirted, and before I knew what was going, we were completely enamored with one another. It was not planned. It simply sort of developed naturally. The information I had just given Mandy was racing through her head as she regarded me in silence. She seemed to be going through each emotion one by one, in my eyes. There was a glimmer of fear followed by a hint of exhilaration before the feeling I was anticipating, disappointment. In order to be sure no one was listening, she grabbed my arm and dragged me back. You should never divulge that to anyone else, she said. Do you comprehend? I sighed and replied, I know, just to get it off my chest, I had to tell you. It was honestly the best sex I've ever had, Mandy. Who cares about sex? She inquired with evident annoyance. What we're discussing here is your connection with your father and his reputation. I answered, gazing down, I know, but it's more than that. Derek is really hilarious, kind, and attractive. I feel like I'm the only girl in the room when he stares at me. I have always. When it comes to business, he is quite serious, but he also exudes an absolutely ridiculous charisma. Every time we are near to one another, I grin. Mandy said, I don't know, Skye, with disdain. I've had a thing for Derek ever since I was a teenager, I said. I just want to see where things go. If it's just sex, then I'll take advantage of it for a while and then cut it off. But who knows? Maybe it could be something more. He could be your freaking soulmate and your dad would still murder both of you, she said, shaking her head. That old man can sit on it, I said in irritation. It's my life, not his to control. Well, he controls the bank account, so he kind of has an edge, she pointed out. I'm not going to let my father rule me forever with money, I said, shaking my head. One day I will be self-sufficient. And I applaud you for your goals, But sleeping with your father's best friend is not really the way to start out, she said, looking over at the elevator as people began to come down. We'll talk about this later. Can you get one more bucket of ice? Sure, I said, smiling. I walked to the back with the bucket, but Derek was the only thing on my mind. It was hard to concentrate on anything else. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I pulled it out, smiling down as Derek's name flashed across the screen. I poked my head around the corner to make sure Mandy wasn't coming and then answered. Hello! Hey there, beautiful, he said, filling my chest with butterflies. You busy? I'm at work, but I have a second, I said, not wanting to sound too desperate to talk to him. Good, I'll cut to the chase then, he replied. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. I made reservations at the Love House at 8. You can meet me there so no one sees us leaving together. Sure, I said happily. That sounds awesome. Great, he said. I'll let you go. Have a good day at work. I hung up the phone and held it to my chest, excitement flowing through me. I wanted to run and tell Mandy, but I knew she would disapprove. I took several deep breaths and finished filling the ice bucket before returning to the front. Dinner with Derek at the Love House. It was going to be amazing.